In this lecture, I want to talk about a really big question when it comes to technology, and one that occupies a lot of my mind. The question is, are we really transforming education with ICT, as a lot of the policies and the literature suggests we are? Or, and this is my problem, are we simply doing the same old, but with added glitz? I wanted to start off with one of the current popular models circulating in the literature that talks about best practice ICT as occurring at the intersection of a teacher's content, pedagogical and technological knowledge, or TPAC, you might have heard that term. That's the dark green triangular type shape in the centre of this diagram. That's the space where your expert knowledge about the subject content you are teaching, the best ways to teach that particular topic, and your knowledge about what technology is most appropriate to support that teaching all come together. It's a kind of super space. This is apparently what we all are aiming for as teachers, including teacher educators. It's actually a really neat way of thinking about integrating technology at a conceptual level, but it has its limitations. My main issue with this way of thinking is that our pedagogical knowledge, that is, the knowledge about the best ways to teach a particular topic or a particular piece of content, is usually confined to existing ways of teaching subjects. So what happens when we don't teach a specific subject, but we leave things really open-ended and inquiry-based? I'm not sure that the model can accommodate that sort of teaching. To me, this model tends to perpetuate or reinforce existing pedagogies and applies far more readily to secondary teaching than I think it does to primary teaching. I think, though, what ICT potentially offers is a whole new set of pedagogical practices, ways that truly transform how learning and teaching are done. It offers a way of subverting or disrupting the current ways that we do school. Perhaps a different way of looking at ideas about transformation through technology is in this model. Most teachers tend to use technology to enhance or augment the ways they currently teach. Think about your discussions in our discussion forum about your own experiences on PP, where a lot of you have talked about seeing interactive whiteboards used on placement largely as a very expensive projector screen for the teacher. So there's been this tendency for teachers to reinforce their central role in the classroom as this holder and giver of knowledge, using technology as a flash way of transmitting that information. Think also about the use of the good copy that many of you have raised in that discussion forum. These are just new ways of doing the same old things, with the teacher tending to be at the centre of it all. In the words of Nicola Yelland, teachers have a tendency to use technology to glitz things up. But being transformative with ICT means changing fundamentally how things are done in school. So this model talks about significant task redesign and design of previously inconceivable tasks. That's not as common in classrooms as I think it should be. Certainly, you guys haven't told me that you've seen very much of that. Think about how other professions are being fundamentally transformed by digital technologies. Take, for example, journalism. There isn't so much tinkering on the edges in the way journalism is now performed by journalists as fundamental shifts in how they perform their role and what journalism ends up being. That's a sort of shift that schools are having to face or should be facing. This idea of transformative use is enshrined in the ePotential ICT capabilities continuum. Very big name for a quite useful tool. Unfortunately, as pre-service teachers and university lecturers, we don't get to see inside of it. But I've put a link on here to the website so you can see an overview of this continuum. Each year, the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development asks teachers in government schools to undertake this survey that then puts them on this continuum for all the different elements that make up a teacher's work. So I've listed here some examples. So learning and teaching, assessment and reporting, classroom organisation, ICT ethics, and there's a few others. For each of those areas, it briefly describes on the website that you can see what a teacher at a foundation level of skill might do, at an emergent level, at an innovative level, and here's the big word, at a transformative level. Think about the words in that transformative stage if you can read them. ICT engaging students to learn new things in new ways. That's what you're aiming for. So what does transformative use of technology or integration of technology look like? In the last lecture, I talked about what best practice is. And I think if you're talking about the E-potential continuum, best practice is probably at the innovative level. What does transformative really look like? I want to talk to you about two views of the future that are put forward by Doug Thomas and John Seeley Brown in their recent book called A New Culture of Learning, and a guy that you might be a little bit familiar with, a guy called Sugata Mitra, and his ideas around schools in the cloud. Thomas and Brown see learning as an experiential process as much as a cognitive process, and that in an increasingly digital world, we learn by doing, watching, and experiencing, learning by absorbing information and ideas and making tacit connections between those ideas. They argue that digital tools enable such learning that is highly self-motivated and based around inquiry, she says, around issues and topics that are of interest to the learner, not the teacher. The emphasis is shifting from the what dimension of knowledge to the where. Where do I find and evaluate the information I need to answer the questions that I have? Play, down here, is another one of these characteristics of emerging new culture of learning. Experimentation in real and particularly, according to Thomas and Brown, in virtual environments. Think of massively multiplayer online games like Minecraft, where the learner is actively engaged in the process of learning rather than being passive. One of the most defining... Oh, and there's the games. Minecraft. See how in this photo here, the students are so engaged in what they're doing. They're being children, playing games. You don't often see that level of total engagement when we teach in old-fashioned or current ways. One of the most defining characteristics of the new approaches to learning, according to Thomas and Brown, is the relative informality of it. It doesn't take place necessarily in a classroom. Kids are jumping online and learning all sorts of things, and they learn it generally within a collective space that has no teacher. Everyone in this space is equal and knowledge gets pooled. Think about how kids learn about different sorts of games or different hobbies. Think about how they talk about things like Harry Potter or Neopets. All of this sort of stuff happens in an online space without adults around. Increasingly, young people, including very young people, are engaged in this type of informal learning outside the school or educational institution. It involves peer-to-peer learning facilitated by new forms of technology, wikis and blogs, forums, and social media in all its variety of forms. So learning is increasingly this collective activity with people with common interests pool their knowledge and their talents in an active engagement with the process of learning. The next initiative I want to talk to you about is one called A Hole in the Wall. Sugata Mitra was working in computer science in India when he conceived the idea of putting a computer in a hole in the wall in a slum next to his workplace and seeing what happened. And what happened was truly amazing. And it was replicated in other experiments all over India and in other countries across the world. Children from the slum near where Sugata worked had no other access to education and had no English, but were able to learn from the computers in these holes in the wall without any formal schooling. Mitra termed this initiative minimally invasive education. And you can see in the top photo here, that this was the very first computer as a hole in the wall. And the children would huddle around this computer and play on it and explore and learn from it. You can see in the bottom two photos that the holes in the wall became a little bit more sophisticated, and they were kiosks, and would draw crowds of children trying to have a turn on the computer. The success was quite enormous. More recently, Mitchell wanted to see what would happen if you took away that sense of threat that he argues is implicit in our current education system, geared as it is towards high-stakes exams and tests, and to replace that idea of threat through exams and the stress associated with that with encouragement. He was doing an experiment with some children who were teaching themselves neuroscience from one of the hole-in-the-wall kiosks. And there was a young woman, 22-year-old young woman, who was working with the children or nearby. And he asked them if she would help them. And she said no, because she didn't do science and wouldn't know how to help them with neuroscience. And his response, which I find hilarious, was just use the method of a grandmother. And he said, stand behind them. Whenever they do anything, just say, wow, how did you do that? And what's next? Gosh, when I was your age, we could never have done that. You know what grannies do. Anyway, so the children who participated in this learning experiment with the 22-year-old Indian woman encouraging them, in fact, learnt more about neuroscience than their counterparts in a privileged private school who had trained science teachers teaching them. And Mitra has replicated that experiment. He now has a network of over 200 English grannies Skyping children in these sorts of examples. And you can see that in this picture over here. Mitra now wants to take this idea a step further to create a school in the cloud where children learn stuff that they are interested in from resources in the cloud and with mentoring in the cloud, done largely without the help of a teacher. In Mitra's view, I think this is a really important one, the role of the teacher is to raise the questions, then stand back and admire the answer. What do you think of his ideas? Take a look at Mitra's most recent TED Talk video. I've given you the URL down here. It goes for 22 minutes. It is delightful and inspiring. I wonder what your reactions would be. The third and final trend I want to talk to you about comes from the world of games, digital games. And it's termed gamification. I'm giving you a definition up there, but it's really integrating elements of games and gameplay into the classroom. And gamification is a phenomenon that's taking hold in business, probably to a greater extent than it is in education, but it's beginning to gain quite a strong foothold in some areas of education. There are people like Mark Prensky, James G. and Jane McGonigal who argue that game players exhibit so many of the sorts of behaviours that we really want our students to display in the classroom. James G. identified 12 learning principles from computer games, or video and computer games, that he argues can be applied in the classroom. Jane McGonigal, who's a games developer and a serious kind of a game player herself, argues that school itself can be a game. So there's two extremes, I guess. One is taking the principles of what it means to be a good gamer and applying those sorts of principles to learning, to the extent of turning school into a game. And in fact, there is a school, it's called Quest to Learn, located in New York, that is entirely games-based. The curriculum is being developed by teachers and computer game developers. Imagine a whole school that's centred on games. McGonigal argues that games offer us 4 major intrinsic rewards that give us things that are missing from our real worlds. And these are satisfying work, the experience or at least the hope of being successful, social connections, and real meaning. Many of you might think that computer games lack meaning, but there's another movement in the gaming world around the idea of what's called serious games. These aren't games that are just played for entertainment, but games that have a higher purpose, whether that purpose is to learn or to train about something, to be informed by something, or to persuade you about something. And they're being developed in a wide range of areas, in education, in health, and for me, serious games focus on social issues and social change. That's where I see the benefit of them. And on this slide, I just move them around, I've given you some references here for those of you who are keen to, and it didn't work. There you are, got them back. Sorry about that. What I hope that I've given you in these last 3 slides are some really new and perhaps challenging ideas to think about in your own journey with integrating technology into your own classrooms. Some of the ideas of Sugata Mitra and Jane McGonigal and their colleagues might seem a little bit far-fetched to some of you, but to me they represent where technology might take schooling and how schooling might be something quite fundamentally different to what it has been for such a very, very, very long time. Earlier in this lecture I talked about technology being layered onto newer pedagogies, but they're not that new. The sorts of things that these people are offering us are really new and very, very transformative. Even if this whole-scale move to these rather futuristic models is difficult for you to make, I want you to think about what elements of these ideas might be things that you could integrate into your own classrooms.